job here. My middle name is Taylor, and I'm named after E.H. Taylor. My grandfather is E.H. Taylor Hay Jr., and my great-grandfather's great-grandfather was E.H. Taylor. So I actually grew up in Louisville and would come to Frankfort in the winter and visit family and go to what is now my grandparents' house, and it was E.H. Taylor's son's house. And we had a lot of connections to the industry, and the family has always been from Frankfurt. So I got out of school in around 2000. Well, I got out of school in 2008, and got linked up with the distillery about the time that we were rejuvenating this brand. And my grandfather gave Mark Brown, CEO, a bottle from 100 years ago. Mark took one look at it and said, "That's the package." And so that's basically what we're seeing here. So probably without that, I might not be working here.
That's neat. Well, Beau, thank you for blessing us with this package here. Really neat story, Beau. Tell us a little bit about who Colonel E.H. Taylor was as a man. What kind of personality did he have?
It's interesting growing up hearing stories and then working here and hearing a separate set of stories and then kind of putting them, and framing them in my head as they actually happened. I feel like I know E.H. Taylor because I know my grandfather. My grandfather is just way ahead of his time. He's a relentless visionary. He's never had a bad idea that was his idea. And I think we see a lot of that with E.H. Taylor and what he built here today. He modernized the bourbon industry. He, bridged that gap from a pot stills and farmers to what the industry is today. And he did that because he had a vision of what the industry could be and what he thought it should be. And he pursued it relentlessly and ignored everybody that told him it was a bad idea.
Talk a little bit more about that, his impact on the industry, and maybe, specifically, I've heard he's pretty innovative and some of those.
So he has a lot of impacts on the industry. The most probably profound went outside of the bourbon industry, which is the Bottled and Bond Act. In a sense, that spread to other industries, the food, just anything consumers are purchasing. But beyond that, he was a master innovator with the production of whiskey as well. So he was actually born in Kentucky, moved to New Orleans, raised by Zachary Taylor, was in the finance industry, and at this time,
former president,
12th president, Zachary Taylor, and he was in the finance industry. E.H. Taylor was. And saw a lot of money coming from Kentucky, where these distillers were putting these barrels away and sending them down to New Orleans. So he actually got into the industry by first touring Europe and learning all about distillation and seeing how the people that had been making whiskey for a long time do it. Took those innovations and basically framed the way bourbon is produced now. Column stills, copper lined, superior product, vast aging warehouses. He built this place to be a tourism operation 100 and something years before it was a tourism operation. And that was his vision, and that's why he went bankrupt doing it.
So you mentioned column stills, his thing. I think you mentioned copper fermenting.
Copper line fermentation tanks, copper line stills, that's where the OFC comes from. He was the first to put in steam heating in our warehouses. So the barrels actually have a full aging cycle, even when it's cold for several months in a row. Warehouse C, which will come up later in today's conversation, is the first warehouse he built here, which is a massive warehouse with a limestone base, a big brick structure, and then you'd say quality bourbon deserves a quality aging environment. Well, at this time, bourbon wasn't really a thing yet to the average consumer. There haven't been laws put in of what is bourbon, what is not bourbon. He was developing this industry. So seeing what his vision, I think, is where we are today.
He was thinking that far ahead.
He was that far ahead, and really, to be relevant in today's industry, you have to have, in the bourbon industry, you have to have leaders that are way ahead of the game. And we've been pretty lucky to have folks like that come through the distillery, and he really started that.
Yeah.
The distillery's motto, honor tradition, embrace change, really comes from E.H. Taylor being an innovator and just pushing the envelope.
He set a good precedent for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey guys, before we even move on to the next topic, thank you, Beau. That's incredible. I can't wait to keep picking your brain, and hopefully everybody that's watching drop some questions for Beau and Joshua. But hey, we've got people from Chicago, all across America, Franklin, Indiana. So lots of people tuning in. Happy to see that. Brent Allen says he picked up some E.H. Taylor small batch today to celebrate Whiskey Wednesday with us. So thank you, Brent, for that. So just one little shout out there.
Great. That's thanks for sharing that, Beau. That's great. I mean, we think about it, from a brand standpoint around here. We think about the brand sort of being, original, having being very innovative and being a bit distinguished. And it sounds like, all those things are really inspired by, Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. himself, and so it's pretty neat.
Yeah, he really helped. One, on the visual side. I mean, this package is 100 years old. We've made some nice upgrades to it over time. But also the tools he gave us to build and make good whiskey with. You have to have a quality facility to make quality whiskey. I've heard Harlan say quality in, quality out.
Yeah.
And I think that really started with a quality facility. He built a state-of-the-art distillery in the late 1800s.
Yeah, you're right, Beau. And it's neat if folks tuning in, if you never sat down and looked at some of these words on this package. It is sort of a replica of what was done over 100 years ago. And let me just tell you, we couldn't come up with some of this stuff. It's not accidental. It's fundamental, of topmost class. We just don't. People don't speak like that anymore. So it's really neat. It is sort of takes you back in a moment of time. It's a bit of a time capsule. So neat to see. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the Bottled and Bond Act. You said he left a legacy in many ways, but one of the things was the Bottled and Bond Act itself. So the Bottled and Bond Act was passed March 3rd, 1897 by Congress. It was America's first consumer protection legislation. So the Bottled and Bond Act was an act to basically ensure the quality of our whiskey here in America, and it predated the Food and Drug Act, Pure Food and Drug Act that was passed in 1906. So in essence, Congress decided that it was more important to make sure our whiskey was of high quality than even before our food and drugs were of high quality.
Priorities.
So there was definitely some priorities there being set, but we're thankful for that because it's a quality standard that still holds today.
What is Bottled and Bond?
Yeah, so for a whiskey to be classified as Bottled and Bond, it has to meet a few criteria. One, it has to be made by one distiller in one distilling season. So one distiller, so on the package, you need to have a DSP number or a distillery number that says where it was made. So there's some transparency there. One distilling season means it was made either in a period from January to June in the calendar year or July to December in the calendar year. It has to be aged for at least 4 years, so that was a big one. So now you have a minimum age standard for the whiskey. So someone's not aging something for 6 months and putting it in the bottle and try to pass it off as good whiskey. And then lastly, it has to be bottled at 100 proof. And so that's a little bit higher proof than a lot of whiskeys today, but it's a sort of a set standard. And not only, the other sort of bourbon standards, no colors or flavors can be added. So it's an extra level of quality sort of certification, for the whiskey itself. And that still holds today. If you're getting a Bottled and Bond bourbon like most of our E.H. Taylor lineup is, then you're getting something with a minimum sort of standard of quality.
We were talking before you guys joined us, and you were explaining the landscape of the whiskey industry when he did the Bottled and Bond Act, late 1800s. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was the Wild West in a sense, and so as a consumer, you could go into a store and you buy whiskey, and a lot of times you'd get it out of a barrel, like someone would tap a barrel, and you didn't know what you were getting. You didn't know where it came from. You didn't know who made it. You didn't know what was put in it. People would add things like tobacco juice and whatnot just to add fake coloring and fake flavoring to doctor it up. And, obviously that's not something that you want as a consumer. You like to, we take it for granted that generally when we buy, food or beverage product today in America, we can look at the label, know what's in it, know where it came from, who made it, and that just wasn't the case 100 plus years ago. And so it's been 124 years since Congress passed that, and E.H. Taylor was the gentleman that spearheaded that act. And he did it for the industry, but he had his own motives too. He knew he was making it right, and so he thought he could benefit by passing that legislation.
I remember hearing that he would call anybody that tried to pass off whiskey, he called it imitation whiskey. I think what he meant was, you're trying to do it the way I do it and stay away from my trademarks and my brands.
Yeah. Yeah, ahead of his time on that too.
Walking around the distillery, is there any pieces left for of E.H. Taylor that you could point out as somebody comes for a tour? Is there a place to look and say, hey, that was definitely by the hands of Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, really the backbone of the distillery. You can see a lot of the different buildings and the synergy between them, and that you can kind of see what era certain buildings were built in. I think the OFC building, which this brand it speaks to, is probably the most, the best example, because we rejuvenated his original distillery and are trying to make whiskey the way he made it, right?
Yeah, we have our Pompeii tours, right? So Bourbon Pompeii, and Warehouse C still stands today. So if you come to our visitor center and look right across the way from our visitor center, you see Warehouse C standing there with that beautiful limestone base, and it still says OFC at the top of the building. So that was completed in about 1895. So and in fact, a lot of the whiskey, we still age a lot of whiskey in that warehouse. In fact, one of the bottles we're about to talk about was aged in that warehouse. So his legacy still holds today for sure.
So we do have, a lot of questions. We're not going to get to them all, but there's some general questions about. And for one, thank you for answering the bottle and bond question. We had several of those. What is bottle and bond? So you answered that. But there's a couple questions, and I'm going to batch these of just to Beau. It's like Mr. Beckman is from this. Beau, is there certain areas of the distillery you like the best? When you're walking around, is there a place that you enjoy being the most?
Yes. Warehouse C definitely has a special place in my heart, but also the building we were just talking about, which you can kind of see on the side label here. That is the original OFC distillery, and when I started in 2010, that building was empty, and we were actually going to work on a project to make it an event space, and the bottom floor was going to be catering kitchen, whatnot, and then the top floor was going to be the event space, and we actually went to start restoring that building after all the plans were done. When they started digging, they found the original brick from his old fermentation tanks from the original distillery that was essentially covered in concrete before we got here, and we had no idea about it. So I used to go and take customers into that building before we really knew what was in there, just of how cool of a building it is. It overlooks the Kentucky River. Then it was just remarkable and made it even more enjoyable that we found out that the spine of its original distillery was still there and in concrete. So we got to put it back to where it was, make whiskey the way he did. And then it was also kind of cool. There's a video montage in that, we take tours through there, and there's a video montage that my grandmother made that my grandfather narrates. So it's kind of fun, full family gets represented in there.
Yes, it's one of my favorite videos, and I actually didn't realize that was your actual grandfather that's doing that, and it's incredible. I mean, that guy's a professional. He's really good at that.
Huh. He could go on for a long time with some stories.
It's really neat. It's really neat. And to you, Joshua, I know we're going to get into tasting, but somebody's asking, which one out of this incredible lineup is your favorite? Is there a go-to in the E.H. Taylor lineup that you like?
That's a great question. I like where your head's at.
Might be a new answer.
Yeah, but I'm a big fan of the lineup, obviously, and I'd say the whole team here is proud of everything that we make. So it's always a little bit tricky, but I'll say it really depends on your mood, the occasion, the company you're in, what you're feeling. I will say though that the E.H. Taylor Single Barrel is just a personal favorite of mine, one that I tend to want to go back to, quite often. It's a great sweet spot from a proof and age standpoint. It's usually 9+ years old. Obviously 100 proof. It's bottled and bond, and so well over the minimum requirement of bottled and bond. But I love that 9-year-old taste profile. For what we do, and it's a single barrel, so everyone's a little bit different. So you can come back to it, and you can get these little nuances depending on which one you're drinking. And so I'm a big fan, but I can promise you there's not a bad one in the bunch.
Yeah, that's great. And you've answered several other questions. Jamie on Buffalo Trace Distillery Facebook did say, how long does this whiskey sit in a barrel? So you've answered that. It's around 9 years.
Yeah, for the single barrel.
Yeah, great.
And so, by the way, just coming back to bottled and bond, that brings us to today. Not only is it Whiskey Wednesday, but it's bottled and bond day. So it's kind of a bit of a holiday, a whiskey holiday around here, because today marks the 124th anniversary since the Bottled and Bond Act was passed on March 3rd, 1897. And we try to do something fun every year. And this year, we're really excited. The team.
You stepped it up this year.
Yeah, we try to. We always try to step it up. Every year, think of something new and different. The team decided that we'd love to do a very special barrel and bottling of E.H. Taylor single barrel this year to commemorate Bottled and Bond Day. And the team came up with this idea of let's pick a very special barrel, bottle it up as a very sort of this commemorative edition, and then let's find some good causes, or some good causes to donate the bottles to, so we can raise some money for folks around the country that might be in need. In this process, we had heard that Chris Stapleton, the musician, was a big fan of E.H. Taylor, and we sort of had that in the back of our mind, and we just had the thought, hey, I wonder if he'd be interested in collaborating with us, on this. And so we reached out, and he was excited. He was in. And so we've partnered with, Chris and Morgan Stapleton and their charitable foundation, Outlaw State of Kind. So they're going to help us raise as much money as we can for causes all around the country with this sort of commemorative limited release. And so he's actually going to sign the bottles, and then we're going to spread the love a little bit around the country to different charitable organizations through their foundation. And the first few bottles are actually, we've partnered with Charity Buzz, and so they've actually had the first few bottles that they're going to auction off for disaster relief in Texas and Southeast Kentucky. We're sitting here in Frankfort, Kentucky right now. We see firsthand, our distillery's on the Kentucky River, and we see the flooding that's going on in this region. And so it's just something, really fun. We're grateful that they wanted to partner, because we know he's going to bring a ton of value for this, and ultimately it's just going to help us do more good with the bottles. And not to mention, there's a lot of fans of Chris Stapleton around here, and so it's something fun for us to do. So
there was what was the tie-in with Chris Stapleton and E.H. Taylor? Where did that come from?
Yeah, there's so we had heard that he was a fan, and he sort of elaborated on that a little bit, and said, when he was introduced to the E.H. Taylor brand by, I think, a producer of his, someone that he works with closely, brought a bottle to the studio one time, and just fell in love, and it sounded like it became a part of their process. He would be able to tell it better than I can, but he said he became a fan then. It's been a part of sort of the process, or the E.H. Taylor has been around ever since for them, just as a fan. And I think the album he was making was a Traveler.
Wow.
Yeah. So really a really neat story, and obviously it was neat to just get a peek inside of sort of what he appreciated about the brand itself, and the connection there.
That's an interesting thing with bourbon, is how much you attach a bottle or a drink to an experience, or to a group of friends. Like when you guys were talking about the favorite E.H. Taylor offering, my favorite is E.H. Taylor Tornado Surviving.
I was going to ask you that. I'm glad you said that.
I got a bottle of it in 2012, and so that was a warehouse C that we talked about. The roof came down during a tornado, and the barrel sat exposed for like 6-8 months, a year, something like that. And when we went and bottled them, it was a clear different taste profile, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
But I only got one bottle, and I opened it during the first game of Kentucky's 2012 National Championship run, and I only drank it during the games. And so now that's my favorite bottle of bourbon I've ever had, and I'm never going to get it again, sadly.
Yeah,
It's just how it works.
yeah, that's great. I think there's a whole lot to that, Beau, of having a great drink with great company and good conversation. I think this is a good example of that, and I hope everybody at home is able to do that. But
yeah, it's all about people and relationships. Yeah, so I will say on a Bottle and Bond Day, if folks that are interested in learning more, or maybe having a shot at one of these commemorative bottles, go to Chris Stapleton's website, Outlaw State of Kind, and you can look at find information on where these bottles might end up there. But these first few bottles are on CharityBuzz.com as well, and so you can find a couple on auction right now.
They're delicious.
well, let's find out.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'm actually getting really thirsty over here. I'm
Let's
on
do
this
it.
side of the camera, but
Clearly, somebody already taxed it a little bit, but that's okay.
We won't name any names on
Yeah.
this video, but we might have a.
Interesting anecdote with barrel picks. I'll let you pour me. I don't want to take too much of it, but pour a lot. There is a correlation between the yield of a barrel and how good it tastes. The
Say
lower
more.
the yield, the better it tastes. It's just a sad part of bourbon, and that's because the more interaction with the oak, the more flavor you're going to take on.
Outside just a pure leaky barrel.
Yeah, unless you just have a leak. Yeah. And so when we did this project, we picked a barrel to have bottled. And one of the, not fun parts of my job these days is when we have low yielding barrels, customers get quite upset because we don't have enough bourbon already. So a low yielding barrel is not something people enjoy.
Sure.
Well, this one was low yielding where it's actually less than 50% of the original volume. So only 9 years old, we have less than 50%. And I thought, obviously, that speaks a lot towards the unicorn. And I have a feeling that this might leave a new favorite with the people that get a bottle.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
So
not
it was low yield, and you saying
It was low yielding, came from Warehouse C, 9 years old. Came out the barrel was filled 125 proof, came out at 137 proof.
Ooh, gained a lot of proof over time.
Yeah, gained
so
a lot
what
of
did you
proof
say the
in those
evaporation
low
was?
floors, over 50%. Started with 53 gallons, less than 30 gallons, less than 25 gallons, came out of it. Boom.
Yeah, very low. So, Beau, should we toast to Mr. E.H. Taylor and our Bottled and Bond Day partnership with Outlaw State of Kind?
I would love to. Well,
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for sharing. Oh boy. Those are really good.
That's great.
I don't mean to.
Yeah, it is tough. It's tough being on this side of the camera, I know, and watching this because you can't taste it or smell it through the being live. But
It tastes and smells great. Let me
yeah,
tell you.
there you go. If there's anything else, okay, we just dropped a link to the charity partner. Anything else you guys want to touch on? Because we don't want to keep you too long. We're at about 25 minutes. But again, lots of questions here, but a lot of folks chiming in about it. Dean Williams Jr. is cracking up over Beau's "but pour a lot" comment. That's a pretty good. I'm stealing that myself. That's a great one.
He's done that more than once, I'm guessing.
It's really great. Yeah. Any closing words? I think that was great.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that these bottles are hard to get your hands on, and that's frustrating for everybody, us included. But the benefit is you can raise a lot of money for good causes because of it.
Yeah.
People being our fans, and we realize, all of us realize that sometimes some of our brands and our whiskeys are harder to find than we would like them to be. It wasn't on purpose. So we're making more, and we appreciate you guys. We appreciate that people seek our products out. So
Yeah.
Hopefully the world opens back up and people can come visit again.
Yeah, because we still have limited tours here, but But yeah, no. So making more whiskey all the time. Big expansion going on here. So, but thank you, Joshua and Beau. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Great chat. I'm going to pick your brain a little bit more even after this. But always good to have you.